I think social media is giving us more indicative views of like what they think as time goes on, I would say.
You're just wrong. Okay.
I'm not wrong.
So
my goal isn't generally to function like from the government. I think like socially we should pressure people to not be as big on like the cancel stuff. That's kind of what I push on.
But what's the point of having this like I guess this principle if you're not going to actually try to institute it into policy?
Because it doesn't have to be, we can have social pressure that isn't like dating norms aren't
so
like.
So you're talking about just culture war.
Yep.
You're not interested.
I'm a YouTuber. That's what I talk about.
Yeah, we know. But then what's the point? All you're doing is complaining that people don't agree with you.
Yeah, getting people to change their mind. That's when I do events like this.
Yes. Was your mind changed?
Nope, but I hope yours was.
Okay.
Today, we will be talking about some of the major pitfalls of the woke narrative. This debate between Destiny and a student is a perfect example of how censorship can lead to disinformation.
I think that over half of like progressives would be in favor of like viciously getting rid of like certain types of thoughts that they feel like don't belong on college campuses at all.
Like what types of thoughts?
Like
And how would you even like eliminate these thoughts? How would these progressives
well, you do it through
on
social
campus,
culture pressure, right?
And are they not allowed to do that?
I don't think they should on college campuses, no. Enforce because I think that a college campus should represent.
This is what I mean. It's like wokeness just ends up turning into.
Wait, I'm answering specifically. You're not letting me respond to your questions.
Wokeness is anything I don't like.
No, that's not true. Okay.
The first thing to note is the student's more standoffish nature and her willingness to interrupt Destiny when he's answering a question that she asked. The decision to debate for theater rather than conversational utility is straight out of Ben Shapiro's playbook.
So the only other reason that you should ever have a conversation or be friends with anyone on the left is, and not even be friends, is if you are in public in front of a large audience and then your goal is to humiliate them as badly as possible. That is the goal of the conversation. The goal is not to convince the person. The goal is not to make friends with that person. You know, if you want to make friends with the person, there's a whole different conversation you can have. But the conversations that are going to make the most difference on campus are the ones where you're in public, in front of large groups of people, or with a camera nearby, and your goal then is to make these people look as bad as possible.
This is what I mean. It's like wokeness just ends up turning into.
Wait, I'm answering specifically. You're not letting me respond to your question.
It's clear she's not looking for a place to test her ideas. She's looking for a soapbox to voice her untested opinions. It's especially funny that she uses these tactics because she thinks Ben Shapiro is a low standard for discourse.
But I'd prefer him to like Ben Shapiro talking about it, I guess, yeah.
Another low standard.
Second of all, she brings up how the perception of woke people is them opposing and discrediting just anything they don't like, and Destiny says that's not true.
Wokeness is anything I don't like.
No, that's not true, okay?
However, at the beginning of the debate, they go through the effort of defining what wokeness going too far means.
Can you concretely define what you mean by wokeness?
Yeah, so I think that progressives, through a lot of arguments surrounding, have you ever heard of the paradox of tolerance?
Yes, that if you're too tolerant of intolerance, you're going to create a society like because you're going to let it be overrun by people who would take advantage of that.
Exactly. That through that argument of the paradox of tolerance, progressives have essentially created the system that allows them to get rid of all dissenting opinion because the dissenting opinions themselves represent like a threat to discourse or democracy or woke values or whatever.
Okay,
that's like the specific thing I'm kind of like pointing at.
Being able to disregard any dissenting opinion by ascribing danger to it is pretty much the same as wokeness being whatever I don't like.
Wokeness is anything I don't like.
No, that's not true, okay? That allows them to get rid of all dissenting opinion because the dissenting opinions themselves represent like a threat to discourse or democracy or woke values or whatever.
It's important to recognize this censorship of information for what it really is because it's starting to have an impact not only on society, but science as well.
Internal emails got leaked when this was brought up, and they were like, okay, well, actually, it looks like this wasn't true at all, but we're not going to really talk about it publicly because people were so happy with the last headlines, it would be kind of to announce now that it didn't actually do much at all. This was like not verbatim, but this is more or less what the contents of the email were. Okay. And it's like, holy well, now we're actually talking about like scientific literature being published and promoted, and now we're talking about picking and choosing which scientific literature we want to promote based on the social agenda that it promotes. That's really scary to me.
And that is really scary, but the student's response is even scarier because she writes it off as an anecdote.
You can throw these anecdotes at me all day, but they will always just be that. They will just be anecdotes. Like, are we actually seeing a meaningful trend? And I mean beyond the scope of individual people.
I don't think you can get a more widespread example than the corruption of the scientific method. We are no longer talking about merely an anecdote. We are talking about a potential negative change to the entire world of medicine. If you can't understand why it's bad for scientists to use politics instead of science, then this is just over your head. Not to mention, the student was the one asking for specific examples in the first place.
Okay, can you give me an example of, like, wokeness run amok?
When you ask someone for an anecdote and they provide you with that anecdote, you don't get to complain that they gave you the exact thing you asked for.
You can throw these anecdotes at me all day, but they will always just be that. They will just be anecdotes. Okay, can you give me an example?
Plus, right before she discounts Destiny's argument, she says, "I'm not even going to disagree."
Okay, like, I'm not even going to disagree that, like, you can throw these anecdotes at me all day.
This hypocritical whiplash is so strong, it actually discredits another one of her arguments.
If you went up to the majority of progressives and you gave all of these examples, do you think they would wholesale start endorsing, like, any of the repercussions that happen in all of these, like, awful anecdotes that you're giving?
Yes.
Where somebody's, like, you're positive
so.
on that. Okay, just like
over
wholesale
50
disagree on
over
that. I think
51%, yes.
you would be able to find plenty of liberal and left-leaning people who would be able to condemn any sort of actions that were taken.
When you explain the repercussions of cancel culture to people thoroughly, then yes, they will start to have some sympathy. However, just like the student, they'll take any and every opportunity to ignore the problem at large.
It's hard to quantify, like, because people say, like, show me, like, a poll or show me a thing of, like, why.
Yes, people ask for evidence. They ask me for these inconvenient things like citations for the assertions that I'm making, where, you have to actually prove the empirical claims that you're making.
You're doing it right now. You're not giving me a chance to speak.
I'm not. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Go for it.
Your goal then is to make these people look as bad as possible.
Not only is this incredibly childish, but she also fails to realize that this wokeness she's defending is what's contributing to the lack of evidence she's demanding.
My understanding was that traditionally at this school, there were days, or there was like one day a year where I think it was specifically black students would take a step back and let everybody have like a day and see like, well, this is what it's like if minorities are missing, and then they do like a off-campus event or something. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to switch it up where they were saying, well, we're going to ask white students to leave, or white faculty or white people to leave college this day. I think Brett sent out an email where he was disagreeing, and he was saying, like, I think it's a bit different when you're asking white people to leave. I don't agree with this. I don't want to partake in this. Basically, people started to show up at his class outside. They were, I don't know if I say threatening him, but they were like screaming at him, shouting at him. They really wanted to fight over him being like racist and stuff like that. And eventually it blew into a thing where, I don't know if he ended up settling with the college before he left or whatever, but he basically left the college because of all the pressure.
Okay, so he was basically he was interested in exploring like race realism.
Okay. He's an evolutionary biologist. It's an appropriate topic for him to explore, right?
If you're going to heavily discourage scientists from analyzing sensitive social situations, you're not allowed to get upset when there's no scientific data surrounding sensitive social situations. And you certainly can't scrutinize a lecture which never even happened.
Well, but hold on, what did you think he was going to say? Was he going to say, like, welcome, today we're going to study the warrior gene and why black people are predisposed? Like, did you really think that was going to be, like, his presentation? Like, we don't even know what the presentation would have been.
What? I know. It would have been very interesting to hear all about.
But we never got to hear it.
The student's body language here is absolutely hilarious when she goes, "What?
What?"
It's like she understands that something is being said to her which she hasn't considered, but rather than taking the argument seriously, she disregards it with sarcasm.
What? I know. It would have been very interesting to hear all about.
But we never got to hear it.
Race realism.
And when she's not dismissing it with sarcasm, she discredits it with misplaced distrust.
And evolutionary biology did have something to say.
But do you
maybe his whole
honestly
presentation.
think that he was sad that he didn't get to give that presentation? Do you think that he was really making that offer to give that lecture? Because
it sounded like the offer would have been
people.
that, like, if you want to have a day where we discuss issues that are relevant to minorities, here is an issue that I can discuss that's relevant to my particular scientific discipline, which I think is what would make the most sense.
The study of how they're inferior to white genes.
How do you know that's what he was going to say?
Here's the crux of the matter. You cannot argue against a voice you haven't heard. And just because a problem is so foreign and so unique that you couldn't imagine it happening to more than one person, doesn't mean that it isn't. Just like mutation, every instance of cancellation is going to be unique. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It does. It's important to understand what kind of social precedent this sets.
We've made a justification for an evolutionary biologist to not talk about evolutionary biology because it's like insensitive.
As communication and technology gets more advanced, Occam's razor moves further away from us every day. As humanity continues to get more complex, do we really want to set a precedent where the more unique your problem is, the less likely people are to believe you? I don't think so.
Maybe
well,
because
how
it
do you-
doesn't exist.
No.
Alright, that's gonna have to do it for this one. Shout out to the best subscriber squad in all of YouTube. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Aren't
So
you
they might not be
telling on yourself a little bit by saying like